Hello, and welcome to the Budgeting and Annual Cycles for Senior Leaders and Governors webinar, which is part of the School Resource Management series delivered by Entrust on behalf of the DfE. This is one of a series of entirely free short sessions that Entrust Support Services have developed in partnership with the DfE around the key areas of school resource management. Further information on the other webinars in the series is at the end of this presentation, as well as on our website, which is on the screen now. My name is Bethany, and I will be your trainer today. I work in the Educational Finance team at Entrust Support Services. Entrust are education specialists working with all phases of maintained schools and academies to provide them with financial assistance and advice. Budgeting is, if used properly, a process which can link together a school or academy's short, medium, and long-term plans. It can provide the vehicle by which the whole of the school or academy can be engaged in the delivery of its plans. We have also produced a resource pack that will go alongside this webinar. The resource pack contains full instructions for the various websites we'll be looking at throughout the presentation, so there is no need for anyone to take copious notes. Included in the pack will be some frequently asked questions you can refer back to, along with some useful internet links to the various sites and tools we'll be looking at today. Some of you may have already downloaded our resource pack, but if not, it is available on the website. These are both the learning outcomes of this session, i.e., what we would like you to better know and understand when the session is finished, and it is also today's structure of delivery. We will start with a quick review of the responsibilities of the role of governors, trustees, and senior leaders for the financial health of their organisations. We will then move on to the purposes of setting a budget, as well as it being a requirement, what it does, and what it is. We will follow that by outlining the importance of setting realistic budgets. The webinar will then outline two main approaches to budget setting, their advantages and disadvantages, and different choices that are available. We will then go through the 4 stages of the budgetary cycle, the key elements, and important issues. Finally, we will look at some of the key questions that you could or should ask to ensure that the budgets you have been presented with are comprehensive and realistic. We hope you will find this a useful and valuable webinar. We hope that it will provide you with a greater understanding of your responsibilities for overseeing the financial health of your school or trust, of the process of creating a budget, and some of the key areas to look at when reviewing a budget. Just to clarify the respective roles of the governor or trustee and head teacher. It is important to point out that as a trustee or governor, your role is a strategic one and encompasses everything under the governor heading. The head teacher has a more operational role, so this is up to the head teacher and senior leadership team to manage the day-to-day running of the school. As governor or trustees, you are the monitoring body, the critical friend. All roles have responsibilities which involve budgets, be that approving or managing them. As governors, your role relating specifically to budgets is the approval of the annual budget and the monitoring of that budget to ensure that the academy or school is on track to reach its long-term vision and the proper financial control is being undertaken. Ofsted said, absolute clarity about the different roles and responsibilities of the head teacher and governors underpins the most effective governance. The roles of trustees, governors, and senior leadership team has many components, one of which is to ensure that your school or academy trust is being run in a financially effective manner. Each school or academy should have a vision of where it would like to be and a plan of how to get there. A core component of that plan is to ensure that it is financially possible and is an effective use of its financial resources. The senior leadership team, including governors and trustees, have a significant role in reviewing and monitoring this financial plan or budget. And in order to effectively be able to carry out this role, you will need to understand some of the key processes involved in its creation, some of the choices that had to be made, and some key questions that could or should be asked to ensure that it is a comprehensive and realistic statement. In addition, trustees in an academy must also take ownership of the trust's financial sustainability and its ability to operate as a going concern. A going concern basis is an opinion based upon all available information that it is financially viable in the long term based upon current operating environments. Financial planning, of which budgeting is a core component, is an essential element of a well-run school or academy. All organisations need to have a vision and a plan of where they want to be in the future. A budget has a two-part role in this plan. Firstly, it reveals whether the plan is financially viable, both in the short and medium term. If it is not, then either the plan needs to be adjusted or other ways of managing the financial resources need to be found. If the plan is found to be financially viable, it provides a route map for your school or academy, explaining how to get from where it is now to where it wants to be in the future. By monitoring this budget, you will also be able to track that progress and spot any deviations. It is also a statutory requirement. The budget is a reporting requirement for both schools and academies. It will be assessed by the local authority for maintained schools and the ESFA for academies. It should also be scrutinised by yourself, the governors or trustees, in length. An authority may suspend a school's right to a delegated budget if the budget share has not been managed satisfactorily. Each authority is obliged to publish a statement each year, setting out details of its planned school's budget, and must keep sets of accounts in the format prescribed by the authority and maintain internal budgetary control systems and controls in order to produce accounts that will integrate with those for the authority. In an academy, the Academy Trust Handbook states that the Board of Trustees must ensure that financial plans are prepared and monitored, satisfying itself that the trust remains a going concern and financially sustainable. The Academy Trust Handbook, sections 2.8 to 2.23, are where the requirements and expectations are on setting a budget, sending your budget to the ESFA, and monitoring the budget. This ensures, as governors or trustees, you are fulfilling your role as a critical friend to the school and ensuring that it is compliant with the Governance Handbook published by the DfE. So let's look at the budget, what it is and what it aims to do. We are now going to have a look at the purpose of setting a budget. As I have previously stated, the budget is a financial plan. It is a costing for all the activities that your school or academy intends in the short and medium term. It provides a measure for the use of those financial resources and a framework for the delegation of authority for those activities. It is based upon the policies of your school or academy, what you do and how you do it. It is expressed in monetary terms. Issues of quality are not directly addressed in a financial budget. It will be formally written down and documented, and it should be reviewed throughout the year, recommended at least 6 times a year. Normally in schools, it will look forward to the next 3 years, so 23 to 24, 24 to 25, and 25 to 26. It will need to be approved by the Board of Trustees in an academy and by school governing boards. The budget must ensure that the school or academy is solvent, but also drives the development of the school vision through its many roles. Planning. The plan needs to balance the expectation of stakeholders, including parents, the wider community, ESFA or local authority, school staff, governors, and pupils, amongst others. It should involve discussions and debates with all the key stakeholders, as sometimes desires and expectations may clash between stakeholders, or may not be realistic given budgetary or other constraints. Stakeholder management and consensus creating can be a significant part of the planning process. Coordinating. The act of creating a plan will involve coordinating activities, ensuring that all sections of the school or academy understand the plan and work together to achieve the desired outcomes. Communicating. The process of setting and monitoring the budget should improve communication within the school or academy. The budget setting and monitoring process will require enhanced communication between departments, cost centres, and the various structures of your organisation in order to ensure the budget is comprehensive and it is adhered to. Control. The budget will also provide controls and checks to activities within the school or academy. Expenditure should be restricted to authorised staff only, and monthly monitoring of variances will ensure that costs and expenses do not deviate from the plan, or reasons are offered for this change. Let's now look at the budget cycle. The budgetary process should follow a cyclical progression as shown in the 4-stage budgetary cycle. These are not separate stages, but interlink and feed into each other to provide ongoing sound financial management. Each stage will be focused upon at different stages during the academic year, some overlapping. So, for example, budget monitoring will occur throughout the year, so at the same time as next year's budget is being created. But they will interlink and inform each other. Variances, which is the difference between the actual spend and budget, developing this year should influence next year's budget, for example. Once the budget has been finalised and agreed, it can be implemented and rolled out to all budget holders. There should be no surprises for budget holders, as it should have been part of the budgetary setting process. Your role will normally focus on approval of the initial budget, asking the questions and being the critical friend. Then following the progress of that budget in the budget monitoring stage. So we will concentrate on these two stages. Initially, however, you will need to approve the budget. There are a range of questions you may wish to ask of the budget producing team. Here are some of the key questions. The budget should reflect in its entirety the school or academy development plan. Have all activities been captured? All new spends and capital projects incorporated? How has the school or academy gone about setting the budget? Which approach have they used? Incremental, zero-based, etc. And why? We will look at this in greater detail later. How accurate was last year's budget? Where were the large over or underspends? What caused them? And have these factors now been incorporated this year? What are the significant changes to the budget from last year? This normally should be reflected in the school development plan, but not always. What assumptions have been made in key areas such as inflation, pupil numbers, and staffing? Are these reasonable? What are they based on? Has the school or academy done some sensitivity analysis? Has the school or academy run a test to see how sensitive the budget is to changes in the key elements of the budget? What would happen, for example, if the school or academy was 5% off with your pupil numbers? Would it make the plans uneconomic and produce a negative budget? How far out would you have to be with pupil numbers for this to happen? What about pay? How far would that have to move to change the economic outlook? This would give you an idea about where the budget is most sensitive to changes and where you could concentrate your efforts on assessing its reliability. One of the key ways in which you can test the quality of the budget that has been presented to you is to check whether it has been benchmarked against similar, not necessarily local, school or academies. There are a number of DFE tools or websites that facilitate benchmarking of schools and academies. Your organisation should have done this annually. If not, why not? We have another webinar about how to produce these reports, so I will not go into detail here. The key benefit to benchmarking your organisation is that it helps you to ask more guided questions about the budget figures provided. For example, your staff costs are usually a significant element of the budget. Staffing costs are usually 70 to 80% of your costs. So, if it is different to that, do you know why? There may well be good reasons, such as level of experience of teaching staff, which should have a qualitative impact, but will be more expensive. What are similar schools or academies' level of staffing costs? Are they managing to get the same results with fewer resources? Benchmarking will give a sense of where your organisation fits in with similar institutions in all areas. So, for example, what proportion of the budget is spent on the leadership team, and how does that compare with similar organisations? So, a question that may arise from this is, how has your school made decisions on the proportion of its budget to be spent on the leadership team? Certain data will have significant impacts on the school or academy budgets. These should have been assessed as accurately as possible. For example, pupil numbers will have a direct impact on funding, staffing costs, and curriculum delivery, so these need to be calculated as accurately as possible. In order to do this, your school or academy should have reviewed the school census, local authority factors, historical trends, and information from the local feeder schools. Another key area this year in particular is inflation. Where has the school got its estimate from? Good sources, for example, should be the Bank of England's monthly NPC reports or Office for National Statistics assessments. How has inflation been addressed over the 3 years? Is this realistic? There are many other questions that may be relevant, such as consideration should have been made to both national and local curriculum requirements. Have they changed? How is the curriculum being delivered? Has it changed? Have new or extra resources been required, or should they have been? Does your school specialise in certain subject areas? What has been the impact of this? Are there going to be any curriculum changes that will require new resources? Has any significant increase in resource been required in the budgeting period? Is this part of the school strategy? Do you know of any major costs that the school will have to incur during the financial year? For example, building works or new IT equipment. The Governance Handbook 2020 gives a range of questions that a governor or trustee may ask about the budget. Links are in the resource pack. Budget monitoring, or monthly management accounts, is the final stage of the budgetary cycle, but it is a significant role for governors or trustees and should be undertaken monthly. You should receive monthly management accounts which reconcile actual spend and income with budgets and a variance analysis of the differences. Variances, which is the difference between budget and actual expenditure, need to be understood, both positive and negative. They may lead to further questions as to how and why these differences have occurred. For example, does the negative variance reveal a problem with systems or processes? Or was it entirely unavoidable? Has a positive variance arisen because of some good practice, which might be used in other areas? You may need to challenge and question the monthly review figures, particularly if they are revealing significant variances, positive or negative. A significant element of the role of a governor or trustee is to ensure the financial health of your school or academy. Variances provide warning lights that there might be issues that your organisation is not fully in control of. That might be unplanned activities or expenditure, miscalculation of the costs of planned activities, or unforeseen changes in the external or internal environment of the school or academy. These you need to know about and assess how and why it happened, and whether there are lessons to be learned or changes to be made. It should always be recognised that even with the best budget setting and monitoring systems, unforeseen and unforeseeable events will happen. Note some differences in the monthly accounts may just depend on timing. For example, an annual bill coming in the first month, giving a substantial month 1 variance. So by keeping a watching brief on variances, you can get a feel for the appropriateness and rigour with which the original budget was set, as well as the control processes within the organisation. It is also good practice to ask for reports that monitor key cost centres, such as nursery, catering, and specific grants, e.g., a PE grant, which can help to review any surplus or deficits more effectively in these areas, which might otherwise get lost in the overall totals. Auditors also often expect to see these as part of their review process. Many of the figures included in the original budget will be base assumptions. For example, that demand for out-of-school activities stay the same. Estimates, such as the number of pupils arriving in October, which can be based upon underlying information, or even guesstimates, such as the cost of gas next year. These assumptions, estimates, and guesstimates will need to be continually reviewed and assessed as the actual situation becomes clearer during the year, and budgets will probably be needed to be adjusted accordingly. Budgets need to reflect the underlying economic situation so that variance analysis is meaningful. It measures actual differences, not changes to estimates, guesstimates, or assumptions. Your school or academy should be continually monitoring these figures, called in-year monitoring. Areas that will normally need to be constantly reviewed during the year include staff structure and numbers. Staff joining or leaving may have significant impact on the budgets. Staff pay. Pay details are often struck in year, so adjustments will normally need to be made. Pupil numbers, based upon the October census. Late joiners will not impact this year in terms of income, but will affect future years. It is important to set realistic budgets from the start, based upon all the most recent and realistic information. Financial. A good realistic budget lowers the risk of a financial crisis during the year. Your school is more likely to be able to fund its planned activities and less likely to spend valuable teaching and management time responding to funding shortages. Educational. Every school needs to have the right resources to support the changing needs of the curriculum and the mix of pupils, e.g. inclusion of SEN/EAL pupils. A good budget will allocate resources to these areas of need or development and therefore help the school to achieve its aims. Image. A school which is managed well financially is likely to have a better external and internal image compared to a school with budgetary problems. Where there is competition for resources, e.g. pupils, staff and sponsorship, a school with a positive image may fare better. Control. A realistic budget will ensure that the correct people have the correct budget. There should be fewer variances and fewer changes. Decision making. A school is likely to make better decisions if it has comprehensive and up-to-date information to base them on. Complete, up-to-date, and realistic budgets provide that information from a financial perspective. One of the questions the governors or trustees should ask of their organisations is how do they go about setting up their budget, and is this appropriate? Your school or academy will have to choose an approach to the process of building the budget. There is no right or wrong approach to building a budget, but by understanding this choice, you will be able to understand where potential gaps or inefficiencies may lie. There are many different methods used to build up your budget. For example, activity-based budgeting, which is a top-down budgeting approach that determines the amount of inputs required to support the targets or outputs set by the academy or school. Or value proposition budgeting. In value proposition budgeting, the budgeter considers questions based upon the activity's value to the organisation. Questions such as, why is this amount included in the budget? Does the item create value for key stakeholders, prime one being pupils? And how does this add value to the organisation compared to its cost? If the cost is greater than the value, then is there another reason why the cost is justified? These also have their own strengths and weaknesses, but are questions worth asking when developing your budget. We will concentrate on the two main approaches adopted by schools and academies: incremental and zero-based budgeting. Firstly, incremental budgeting. This approach takes last year's budget and adds or subtracts according to changes in the external or internal environment. Clearly, the two major elements to a school or academy budget are income from the government based upon the number of pupils expected to attend during the next 3 years, and staff costs. These can be assessed in advance, and these can be used to drive forward this budgetary approach. This is probably the type of budget model you are used to seeing. Let's look at the advantages of this approach. Firstly, it is stable. Change for the most part will only be gradual, so budget holders can feel confident that current budgets will more or less continue in the future. Secondly, it is developmental. Changes tend to happen over time, so the proportion of budgets spent in areas do change, but over a period rather than between budgets. This helps planning over budgetary periods rather than having a sudden stop to a flow of funds. It has the advantage of being consistent. The budget should look very consistent in focus and structure over budgetary periods. Focus will then be on exception reporting, concentrating on significant changes year on year. It is simple and easy to understand, simple to produce, and the budget will be familiar to both internal and externally interested parties. Avoids departmental conflict. The key discussions about relative sizes of budgets have already happened. Changes between departments are incremental and should be easily explained. And finally, it can be quickly produced. Often this is a key factor when we are heavily pressed in time and resources. These advantages are, however, very operational. They help with the process of creating a budget, not necessarily of ensuring that it is as efficient as it might be. Incremental budgeting can, however, stifle innovation and change. The budgeting process should be an outcome of the planning process, not its key driver. However, a budgetary approach which focuses on the same as last year's approach may also feed into plans for the forthcoming periods. An incremental budgeting approach is based upon assuming that conditions, processes, and delivery is not changing significantly. This may be true, but underlying situations must be thoroughly reviewed before this stance is taken. An incremental budgeting approach doesn't encourage the questioning of current delivery and working processes. The budget is, as we said, the plan for the forthcoming period in financial terms. Once that is in place, it tends to lock in the path going forward and its underlying policies and processes. So the best time to review the structure's policies of the school or academy is during the developmental plan and budget creation process. Incremental budgeting tends to lock in the same as last year approach. On the basis that next year's budget will be based upon this year's, and in particular this year's actual spend, in order to protect next year's budget and the following years, spending the whole of this year's budget would be a natural response. This obviously can lead to inefficiencies and unreported overspend, as it would not create an adverse variance. Any inefficiency or budgetary slack will be built into the budget going forward. Obviously, these funds could be better used in more relevant and appropriate areas. It could, for example, stifle new initiatives as there appeared to be a lack of funds to finance it. In some ways, zero-based budgeting answers all the disadvantages of the incremental budgeting approach, but the disadvantages of this approach are the advantages of incremental budgeting. Zero-based budgeting is the approach where all expenses must be justified for each financial year. It is free from past decision making and links directly to the school improvement plan. It effectively starts with a blank sheet of paper. Every expenditure is analysed for its relevance to the school plan, its effectiveness, and economy. The budget is then built around what is needed for the upcoming year, regardless of whether the budget is higher or lower than the previous one. It inherently questions each cost and requires justifications and a thorough examination of underlying conditions and constraints. By doing this, all budgetary slack or inefficiencies will be removed, if done properly. Clearly, this is an approach that can help to create financial efficiencies. However, there are, of course, significant drawbacks. The incremental approach is seen to have an advantage of being quick and simple. The zero-based approach naturally is very time-consuming and complicated. The budget-setting teams will have to know and understand the many drivers of costs in their departments. They will need to know how to ensure efficiency and economy can be gleaned from each section, and then argue and justify the decisions they have made. They will need to unpick previous decisions about priorities, methods, and structure, and reassess them. This will probably mean some difficult questions and reassessments about what the key priorities of the school or section department are, with winners and losers. This may create conflict between departments. There are also unknowns. Not all costs coming through in the future can be recognised and valued in advance. There will have to be some funds that are unallocated but are for unexpected events. So the drawbacks are predominantly operational. As you can see, there are many advantages and disadvantages to each approach, and your school or academy will have decided which approach to adopt. It may also not be a matter of either or, but perhaps a mixed approach might be most appropriate. So, for example, it might be appropriate to only go to zero-based budgeting every 3 years. It will mean that a fresh look at the costs happens every 3 years, and the inefficiencies and slack that might develop in the intervening periods are removed. The significant time, resources, and energy spent in zero-based budgeting will then only be spent every 3 years. Another approach might be to leave the core activities to incremental budgeting, particularly if they are not changing much over time, and use zero-based budgeting to focus on new or rapidly changing areas. These areas will need to reflect on their budgets in the light of significant changes, and a back to the drawing board approach might be the best approach. So incremental might be most appropriate where pupil numbers are constant and curriculum and teaching strategies have not changed. This may be the second year of a new development, which had a zero-based budget last year. So the need to strip back to basics already happened last year. It may be that the amounts concerned are small, for example, out-of-school music lessons, and so the impact in terms of going for zero-based reviews would not be covered by any savings. Likewise, zero-based budget setting may be required if there are new areas or developments to the school, such as merging with a trust, where an in-depth analysis of the costs of this development needs to be known. Specific projects may well benefit from this kind of review, such as nursery costs, which are sensitive to small changes. Budgets where large variances have developed without an obvious cause would also be a good area to use zero-based budgeting techniques. Whichever methodology has been chosen, it is important that your school or academy is clear on their approach and the reasons why. You also may wish to reflect through discussion with the organisation on this approach and whether alternatives have been sufficiently assessed. Let's look at key processes, dates and deadlines. Schools and academies have key dates in the budgetary planning cycle. Details are in the resource pack. Here are some of the key dates for the academies. And for the schools, although this is Staffordshire schools, you will have a similar set of dates in your area. As a governor or trustee, you should be reviewing and signing a range of forms and reports. These are the key ones. As we have discussed, the prime one we have been focusing on are the management accounts and monitoring reports. The school's financial value statement and the school's resource management self-assessment checklist, which needs to be returned in March each year, asks for assurance in 6 areas: governance, school strategy, annual budget, staffing, value for money, and protecting the public money from the governors/trustees. Scheme of delegation. A submitted record of what tasks and roles have been delegated beyond the board. There are limits. Annual budget and 3-year modeler as discussed. Annual declaration of interests. Governing boards must publish a register of interests online. Cash flow forecasts. Again, as part of your role, you should be monitoring the cash health of the school or academy, ensuring that cash resources can meet future demands or that provisions have been made for any potential shortfalls. Annual accounts for the year ended 31st of March, and the various audit reports, internal, external, and school fund audits, audits of the SFVS, all of which should give you confidence in the systems and processes of your school or academy. As we draw to the end of the webinar, let's just go over the learning outcomes of the session. We have looked at the financial responsibilities of governors and trustees and senior leaders, outlining how the budget fits with the school strategy and financial planning system. We then looked at 2 approaches to setting a budget and how beneficial it is setting a realistic budget at the start of the process. We followed that up with a review of some of the key questions that you might consider, both at the initial budget approving stage and throughout the budgetary monitoring process, before reminding you of some key dates that you need to be aware of. I would just like to remind you that you can book onto the other school resource management webinars via the website that is currently shown on this slide. To book your place on a course, please visit www.schoolresourcemanagement.co.uk. We have produced a resource pack that will go alongside this webinar, which is available on the website on screen now. Should you have any questions following the webinar, please email educationspace@entrust-ed.co.uk or use the Ask the Expert feature on the website to send your questions to our experts. Thank you and goodbye.